Hi, Kiko.
Thank you for taking the time.
Thank you. My pleasure.
Hey, Lexi, congratulations on the film. I know your background as I think you're German Palestinian American, correct? I don't want to get that wrong. Um,
I mean, I think that's the first time somebody actually managed to put the two dashes in
there you
and,
go.
identify me correctly.
It's important. It's important. I'm wondering where a story like this came from with your background.
Yeah. Well, to be very fair, I only identify now as American Palestinian because the Germans took my passport.
Oh my goodness.
But you are correct. Culturally, I'm definitely of the three, and I lived in the US long enough now to say that's the only passport I have. So you are
Is that a
absolutely
whole other story?
not really. I mean, it's a little bit like the Germans can decide if they give you double citizenship or not, they are, I would say slightly dodgy about who they give the permission and who they don't.
Hmm.
And yes, I'm still holding a grudge, but also it's fine. But I'm very impressed that you actually, because people, I don't know what it is, they have a fear of using two dashes. They're okay with saying, German American or Palestinian American. When it comes to like this person has two parents from two different cultures, but also is a citizen of this nation, they lose it,
Right, exactly.
So
Too hard to
yeah, anyway.
comprehend.
That story does definitely come from my background because it was half Catholic, half Muslim. Parents fighting over which religion I should join, more in a humorous way because neither one of them was completely committed to their religion either, but they had a little battle of what I should join. And so
Hmm.
that's definitely where my fascination with what are these religions and which one is the true one? And it ended up making me study theology. And so when you study theology, you end up becoming an agnostic or atheist because you find out about all these brilliant mythologies and you
Right.
realize there cannot be one true one, but they're all wonderful.
Yeah, definitely. So when you were little, what do you remember the most about your mom and your dad, even though they were playing around with it a little bit, trying to get you to go to church, or how did that work in your household? Was it a push and pull type of thing?
Well, they weren't always playing. To be honest, it was is somewhat serious because growing up in Germany, you had this thing where Germans to this day still have religion in school, and they basically have Protestant and Catholic religion.
Mm.
And there's this hour in the middle of your day in your school plan where you now go off to whoever of the two tribes you belong to. Now you have the Turkish kids who are Muslim, who basically are sent out to run around in the schoolyard, have nothing to do for an hour. And that was always looked upon as like you instantly making them the other. You are, it wasn't a good thing. And although I always, Turkish kids in Germany were my people, because there wasn't another Arab kid in town, right? In that town I grew up in. There really wasn't I was the only Arab kid. And so the Turkish kids I related most to because, they were at least a little bit like me. And I really wanted to take that hour off and join them. But I think friends of my mother, really said to her, you shouldn't do that. This is going to cause all kinds of troubles with a choice of school and, how she's being looked at. And so she secretly, without my parents were divorced at that point, so she secretly, without telling my dad, baptized me. And
Oh,
as a
wow.
7-year-old, which is usually unheard of in Catholicism, which is you get baptized as a baby, right?
Right.
So you imagine this, there's this photo of me as a 7-year-old with somebody pouring water over my head. Very, very strange. Not so strange for born again Christians here, but very strange when you're a Catholic, right? So my father got very mad at this because now it's like, the child of a Muslim father is always a Muslim. And so, I basically had to survive between these two cultures. And I honestly kind of consider myself culturally Muslim and culturally Catholic because, uh, you know, because neither of my parents were really themselves that religious and they both criticized their own religion. But because there was this back and forth and we had, Christmas and Ramadan and I got gifts for both and all of that. I thought it was always a wonderful place to be, but uh, answering the question of, well, which is the safe bet? What should you be choosing when you can choose? Like, that to me was always such an interesting question, you
Hmm.
know?
Did you have to make a decision somewhere down the line? I mean, are you a practicing Muslim or a practicing Catholic now?
I mean, to be honest, once I studied theology, I
Right.
really did become an agnostic. Like
Mhm.
there's a great admiration for religion, and there's definitely I have a belief in, I don't think nature, everything you see in nature, all the miracles just popped up. Do I believe that there's a certain deity responsible for it, and that the people who live on the continent where that religion is the most spread are the lucky ones who have it right? No. It's almost impossible to believe that. If you learn about all of the religion, it's nearly impossible to say they got it right, because you end up liking parts of all of them. And you also learn, how they were, developed originally and then how people abuse them for their own systemic oppressions. Few people really know that in Islam, the Prophet Muhammad had wonderful women around him, women warriors, women imams. The same with Catholicism. There's nothing that says in the Bible that women shouldn't be popes or priests. That
Mhm.
all has to do with money. And, if the church has to pay for a priest who isn't married and has kids, that's much cheaper than, if they have to actually spend money on an entire family. So there's so much um, manipulation involved. And then you have politics manipulating religious people for their purpose. So, but if you look at it purely, it just becomes a really fascinating world of mythology. And I think that's where I'm at.
Mhm. How do you think a film that has such deep ideas, how does it lend itself to uh, a story about fighting and hand-to-hand combat? Do you think is it because so many religions call themselves the real one, and that's why there's so many wars in this world?
Well, I think there's an aspect of most religions where they want to recruit, politicize to everybody and recruit everybody. So because they believe that they are the true one. And I think that gets exploited a lot by, colonizers who, want a certain piece of land, who then bring religion into the play. Um, And so, most people would say, oh, there's been so much fighting about religion. I actually don't think that's true. I don't think if you really, really research this, I don't think a lot of people have fought over whose God is right. When it came down to it, it always was whose land is this and who's going to own it by the time we're done fighting, right? And so I think, unfortunately, religion has always suffered from being abused by people who want power. But is fighting a natural fit for religion? Sure, no doubt. And, there's the thing when you want to do a martial arts movie where, we can't, for some reason, make martial arts movies like we make boxing movies. In a boxing movie, you can make a movie about a boxing tournament or a guy who wants to be world champion like Rocky, and nobody says a thing about it. But do that with martial arts, and suddenly you have to come up with a plot that my brother got kidnapped, and if I don't fight in this underground tournament, he's going to get killed. Or, my wife has leukemia, and if I don't win this money in this tournament, she's going to die. Like, it's always some dumb BS that you have, and I don't know why that is. I have no idea why we can't just look at it like we look at boxing, but that's the truth. So that's why most martial arts movies are always these B movies with this super stupid plots, and it bothered me for my whole life. It has bothered me. Matrix was the only one that kind of like eliminated that by going into the future. And so I thought, this is what I should do. I should, set it in the future and come up with a plot that may be far-fetched, but if you are on the verge of destruction in a world where people bomb stuff here and there and pretend it's about religion, maybe somebody throwing out a far-fetched idea is actually not that far-fetched, and
Yeah.
maybe desperation makes people go. And so it also managed to actually make the tournament slightly deeper. I could have maybe gone the Karate Kid way, but that really only worked, for that age group. When you have full grown men and you're not allowed to say it's just a tournament, it becomes much more difficult. So you have to give them a purpose. And that was the only purpose I could think of that like people would actually be interested.
Yeah. It's interesting that you brought up The Matrix because I was thinking about that film as I was watching this one because your main character, I'm not sure how to pronounce the actor's first name. Is it Desiree?
Yeah, Des. Yeah.
Yes. He reminded me the way that he fights is very methodical, but very calm. Like it almost seems like, when that in that section of the Matrix where they find out Neo is the one, and he kind of just like he does it so effortlessly. That's how I felt that he was fighting, very effortless.
That's true. Are you a martial artist, right?
I'm not.
You're not?
I'm
Oh,
not.
well, that surprises me that you even recognize that, because that the whole purpose of that martial arts was that it is a smart martial arts. It's not an
Mhm.
emotional martial arts. At the time when I wrote that movie, I practiced a certain type of martial arts my whole life, and the best one I practiced was really just 5, 6 years ago was a martial arts called Sistema, which to this day I believe is the smartest martial arts in existence. Unfortunately, Sistema is very Russian, and when we had this movie greenlit, it was a moment in time where people couldn't even say white Russian without being accused of being pro-Russian. And so I got clear directions that I couldn't really like say that this is the martial arts. And so I had to come up with something a bit more fictitious. But I wanted to stick with the kind of theory behind this martial arts, which is it's not good looking martial arts. It is you almost look silly and unorthodox when you do that. It's not elegant. It's not Van Damme. Like you don't even really want to put this in front of the cinema because it's not a good-looking martial arts, but it is the one that works the best. Like if I would be in trouble and somebody would attack me, I would hope that I remember the most from Sistema because that was the most life-saying smart martial arts I've ever practiced in my life.
Hmm.
But now you had him, basically just, analyze the other person's movement, and then you have to kind of make your body the smallest target for the other person. And that doesn't always look great. It looks like you're this octopus jelly, kind of like doing weird things. And at times he did something very right that would have been the right thing to do. But I looked back at it on screen. I was like, yeah, I can't leave that. At some point I have to like make it somewhat cinematic. So it's a bit of a mix, but I'm glad you picked that up because the one thing that smart fighters do is they are never emotional.
Hmm.
It's always about, being the most calm because when you breathe and you calm, um, that's when your brain works the best. And the
Hmm.
minute you get tight or you get nervous or you get emotional, I'm like, now I'm really gonna get you, it all goes out the window.
Makes sense. Um, all the religions that you bring up in the movie, are all of those real, or did you make some up? Because I looked up a couple of them and I couldn't find them. So
Yeah, no, I hope you didn't find any of them because they're all fictitious. I mean, they
okay,
wouldn't let me use real religions. And frankly, I don't know if I would have felt comfortable, using, because I didn't want to say this one loses in the first round, right? Because obviously it's not about that, right?
right.
So I had to come up with fictitious names. I'm hoping that people recognize a little bit the cultural background
Okay.
um, of each of them. And, you know, sometimes I even mix, like, there's one that could be this or it could be that. But I feel like people will more in the dialogue and who is actually actually behind this one religion, they will recognize, what are we trying to say here? Who acts like this in the world?
Right.
You know?
How do you think this film speaks to what's happening in the US right now? Some people think that we're headed toward more of a theocracy than we've ever have before. So, what would you like
I
people to
think
pick up?
that's I think those people are correct. I'm very happy that I managed to cast two trans actors and one non-binary actor at a time where we didn't even know that would become an issue. But obviously, I think people who are in the activist realm knew that it was an issue, even though during Democratic administration it wasn't as open. But you can always tell when a group is not protected, whether it is this openly hunted as it is now, it doesn't really matter because when you are member of this group, you know that the current administration doesn't have your back either. Otherwise, they would have set things in place that would protect them more. And um, I felt like for the first time I was able to cast a movie with in a way that I see the world, like this is how the world should be, which was challenging because I couldn't even find enough Arab actors, which I really wanted to cast. But I think those people are not wrong in terms of how dark it's getting. There's also, though, a way where I think, there's a great saying that I believe in, and it goes, people don't change until it's too painful not to. And if you think about it, that is so true. Like it's more comfortable not making a big change.
Mm.
And, that's why people say you can't quit an addiction until you hit rock bottom. And I think the US and many Western countries, but let's talk about the US here, has an addiction to fascism, to racism, to any kind of oppressive system, and whether that is happening under the lesser evil party or the more evil party, it still exists. I would say no person of color would say, oh, well, whenever we have a Democrat and we're all good. That's simply not correct, right? So I think when you're playing with this idea that let's just be comfortable with the lesser evil and let's just put up with that, that gets you into trouble, you
Mm.
know? The lesser evil added to the lesser evil, added to the lesser evil, eventually brings us here. And may actually, until people really change, may bring us an even bigger evil. I mean, the Germans didn't stop starting, world wars until their entire country was in ashes.
Right.
And frankly, they sound like they're over it right now and ready to start a new one. So there you go.
Yeah. A couple more questions, but 28% of Americans are now religiously unaffiliated, according to a study. I think it was by the Pew Research. Do you have any theories on why this is increasing or has been increasing over the years?
Um, I think there is, I probably think that number was always, first of all, I think it's higher now. And I think that, it was always high, but I think the courage to say that you're not religious has probably grown a little bit. Like, I still think people are not comfortable in the US to say they're atheist, right? But you can say, I don't belong to a certain religion, Whether they really say, I don't believe in God, I think that takes actually more courage for people. I think religion, there's a lot of rules, even in the most mellow religions out there, there is some kind of set of rules that you have to follow, and there's always a 15% tithe you have to make from your paycheck. In the US, you had this account which really fascinated me. I think it was called Preacher and Kicks. Do you know it?
I do not.
It was on Instagram, and this guy very innocently basically documented all these famous Christian evangelical preachers and their kicks, their shoes that they wore, which, to be honest, I had no idea that there's $2,000 kicks. I thought I was into kicks, but I didn't know that there were kicks you can buy that literally cost 10,000. And so out came that all of these successful born again Christian and evangelical priests had all these expensive shoes. I always was thought, why do they all have private jets? Why is the money always going to them? But the kicks really killed me because that was like, you really don't need kicks like that. There's
Interesting.
enough poor people that you could give this money to before you pay $2,000 for a pair of kicks. And I think that stuff coming out on the internet, that, once, especially in the US, where you have to work hard for your money, right? You don't get paid a lot. The taxes you still have to pay. Everything is expensive. People don't have health insurance. So I think people have a tough time giving up 15% of their check. And I think they'd rather say, listen, I practice in my home before I buy this guy some $2,000 kicks. And I think that's smart. It would surprise me if Americans wouldn't grow. In Germany, for example, you had to pay taxes to the church from like when you were a baby. Like it still is like that. You have to officially exit the church to be released from that tax. And so that caused an entire like crowd to say, okay, well, I'm exiting. And I think it's the same way in the other countries, just less official and more like, yeah, I'm praying at home, you know.
Mm. Wow. That's fascinating. I'm gonna have to look up that Kicks website now. And I'm based in Texas, so I want to see which of our big pastors over here are.
Oh, you definitely, just Google preachers and sneakers or preachers and kicks because there was articles written about it too.
That's amazing. Hey, well, Lexi, thank you so much for taking the time and congratulations on Absolute Dominion. And we can't wait to see what you do next.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it.